Dying Light 2 has 4 different archetypes: the tank, the medic, the ranger, and the brawler. And the brawler is how I've played most of my game. And today we're going to go through a brawler build, talk about the skills, the gear, the weapons, and everything in between. Let's go. Hey, this video is brought to you by no one. Hit the subscribe button. Let's go. The main focus for the brawler gear sets is on one-handed weapons, so that's really what we're going to be focusing on. And while littering in some of the parkour attacks to AoE enemies around us and keep the bigger groups of infected away, because the parkour abilities are just kind of so OP for the most part that you really have to use them to some regard, and it also just gives you great combat and parkour points to actually level up your skills. Using the one-handed weapons, your attack speed is much faster than a two-handed, except the trade-off here is you don't have a lot of AoE ability. Your attack swings will, for the most part, only hit a single target. It is possible to cleave multiple, but you're mostly only going to hit one. With a two-handed weapon, you have a slower attack speed, but you have a massive cleave and will hit pretty much everything more or less in front of you. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we discuss skills, but your main focus when fighting should be on using the power attack for extra damage on these single targets, especially bosses, and the whirlwind attack if you are surrounded by infected. This will act as like your two-handed weapon kind of cleave attack, right? If you are surrounded, you use the whirlwind, it'll spread enemies out, give you a little bit of space to kind of decide what you want to do. But for the most part, we're focusing just on using these one-handed weapons. And I really like the one-handed weapons because it feels more like how the game is supposed to flow when you're moving quickly around with the parkour attacks and just parkouring around. You do want to have quick, fast weapons to get these attacks off. And that's why I like the one-handed weapons, because you can kind of swing in, drop tons of damage, and then swing out and keep moving around as you see fit. Now let's talk about the weapons. And for the most part, you're obviously going to be using the one-handed weapons, but I would suggest you to have at least a slashing and a blunt weapon on hand. Slashing weapons have a chance to dismember the enemy, while the blunt weapons have a chance to stagger enemies. There is a stagger meter underneath an enemy's health bar, and if this fills up, it will actually stagger them. But for the most part, you don't really need to worry about the bar itself. Just swing away with the blunt weapon, and it will stagger them if it does trigger this. I personally prefer to use the slashing weapons mostly on human enemies, although occasionally on infected, because you can cut off the infected's limbs much more simply. But for the most part, on the infecteds, I typically use blunt weapons because of the stagger that you get from that. And when there's a lot of infected around you, a stagger is more beneficial than just taking off a limb or two when they're still going to keep coming towards you. I've just found that using the blunt weapons to stagger them, push them back a little bit, give you a bit more space and control about what's happening around you. I will occasionally switch to a two-handed weapon. I always have one of them in my 4 weapon slots for the larger arc when I'm surrounded. It just gives you great help in those situations, and especially when it's just the generic, infected that move really slow, they don't have any extra attacks. If there's tons of them around, you can just bring out a two-handed weapon and just stand there for 2 seconds and kill them all and then move on your way. For your weapon mods, you have to have the reinforcement mod. It's an absolute must to make your weapons last much longer. As you upgrade this mod, it will increase the amount of durability reduction you get. I personally like the spark mods as the increase the base damage of your weapon while activating a shock effect on critical hits, which stuns the enemies in front of you, and it can bounce between enemies as well. I just personally like this better than some of the other mods, and I've been personally putting most of my points into upgrading spark and the reinforcement mod. For throwables, I use the throwing knives, the decoys for the infected to group them up, and the molotovs to throw down and rain death upon them. Molotovs don't generate sound, they're just a great all-around ability to use for this because you can deal tons of damage to them, and you can put molotovs or the fire onto enemies and stagger a group around the fire and then just focus on the ones that kind of make through. Just helps fighting larger packs much more simply. Now let's talk about skills, and the best skill arguably in the game, and that I think you absolutely have to get pretty much straight off the bat, is drop kick. You perform a powerful kick while jumping. This attack will knock back anything in front of you. It will hit multiple targets. It will knock them back off a huge distance, so you can knock things off roofs and into spikes, whatever it may be. And it also does tons of damage. It will also stagger the bosses or the larger infected as well, so you can get a brief stagger moment from doing that on them. The downside to this ability is that you will hit the ground and have to actually stand back up, so just be careful about doing this into a large pack because they can actually hit you while you're standing up. Next, you're going to want to make sure you pick up the power attack and then ground pound and the whirlwind attacks. These are your main weapon kits. So the power attack is your big wind up, like heavy attack. Ground pound can be activated by jumping off something and landing on the ground, or do an AoE kind of cone around you. And the whirlwind, which we talked about earlier, will do a big swing attack in a 360 to kind of spread enemies out in front of you. I personally also think that perfect parry and the block projectiles line after that is really valuable to have, so you can stop projectiles from coming towards you. And I also like being able to block and initiating staggers from that and then moving my combat along. I personally just prefer to block than to dodge. So that you could go perfect dodge instead of perfect parry if you do want to go down that route. For your attributes, the key focus in Dying Light 2 for this build is on stamina. And I think for the most part, stamina is the key focus in Dying Light 2 over health. Stamina just runs all of your parkour, it runs all of your weapon swinging, all of the attacks and things that you can do. The more stamina you have, the more attacks and parkour abilities you can do and chain together. And health is still valuable. You absolutely want to increase your health, especially because this build is melee, so you will need a little bit of health, but stamina should be the key focus regardless, really. And you know, most of the stamina attacks will do tons of damage, so just make sure you have enough health to get these skills that you need, like drop kick and ground pound, etc., and then just max out your stamina. The armor itself and the Brawler set is one of my favorites. As a one-handed weapon specialist, this gives you an increase to your one-handed weapon damage. It also increases your combat points that you gain, as well as reduce the stamina cost of using melee weapons. It's really a perfect set just for smashing one-handed weapons. These sets tend to have a decent armor value as well, so you can take a bit of damage while you are in the fray and in the middle of all the infected. I've also been having 1 or 2 medic pieces, as the medic set tends to have some of the most passives per gear. So a lot of the medic sets will have 6 or 7 passives on them. They won't have any armor value, but you'll get more passives. So more bang for your buck, I guess, in terms of passives. The medic set buffs your health regen, which is important because we are going to be in melee. It also buffs your parkour attacks and XP, because we are going to be tinkering with some of the parkour attacks and how valuable they are to use. I think having a couple of the medic set really helps out when you look at your stats to see how much damage you're actually doing and the multiplier that you can get by having a little bit of parkour attack damage on that increase as well. The gear that has a higher gear value doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for you. It's really about the passives. For the most part, as long as you've got a bit of gear value or armor value, you'll be okay. You really want to make sure you're getting as much bang for your buck in passives. If a gear piece has tons of passives on it and the passives that you want to use, that should be your focus over just increasing your armor value by 1 point. Now let's talk about some build tips. And the main thing when you're entering combat, if you do need to, use dropkick to clear space. You can stagger enemies with the blunt weapons when you're surrounded. Dismember when you're trying to move fast, because you can cut off limbs and kind of slow down the enemies from coming to you and then keep moving past them. Whirlwind is a bit of a get out of jail free card that you can just use if there's enemies around you. You can just initiate that animation and the animation will play out all of its way through. So you'll just initiate the swing, you'll swing all the way around, enemies will stagger around you, you'll be able to kind of adjust what you want to do from there. You can also combo your decoy and your molotovs. When you use the decoy, it will bring all of the infected to the decoy. Then you can put your molotov down and set them all on fire at once. If you're looking for gear to try and put this build together, the best place to go is the GRE facilities, obviously go at night, and the convoys, and in the convoys you want to go as day. So for the most part, this is where you're going to get the best gear in the game. You can get some good pieces from vendors, but in my experience, you get most of the epics and legendary or artifact gear from the GRE facilities and the convoys. You've got a higher chance of getting better gear. The more pieces you get, especially in the GRE facilities, the more chance you've got of actually getting better pieces. But check the vendors when you do go past them, but I found that facilities are the best place to go. And my last tip for you is to check out my skills video, which goes through the best skills to unlock early in the game. It's a quick video that will really help you guys out in the long run. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.